They laughed at her like she was nothing, but before the night would end, the same laughter would choke in their throats. If you're new to this channel, just subscribe now, and say it in the comment section. The message came in at exactly 3:17 p.m. Chiamaka was seated on a wooden stool in her modest apartment in Yaba, her laptop open in front of her, numbers reflecting in her calm, focused eyes. The hum of a small standing fan filled the quiet room, pushing warm Lagos air around in slow circles. Her phone buzzed once. She ignored it. It buzzed again. With a slight sigh, she reached for it, expecting a client, a delayed payment alert, or another supplier asking for confirmation. But the moment she saw the sender's name, her fingers paused mid-air. Auntie Ngozi. Chiamaka stared at the screen for a few seconds before opening the message. Family dinner tonight at your Uncle Ifini's house in Lekki. 7 p.m. Don't be late. No greeting. No warmth. Just instruction. Typical. She leaned back slowly, her gaze drifting from the phone to the peeling paint on her wall. The room suddenly felt smaller. Lekki. Uncle Ifini's mansion. A place where laughter was expensive, conversations were competitive, and worth was measured not by character, but by how loudly your wealth could speak. Chiamaka exhaled softly. She already knew how the night would go. The side glances. The polite smiles that never reached the eyes. The whisper she wasn't meant to hear, but always did. Is she still struggling like that? I thought she went to school. What happened? Some people just don't have sense for money. She closed her eyes briefly. She could already hear Obina's voice in her head, smooth, arrogant, always ready with a joke that cut deeper than it sounded. She shouldn't go. Everything in her told her not to go. She had work to finish. Orders to confirm. Payments to track. Real things that mattered. But then, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her mother. Please attend. It's family. Chiamaka stared at that message longer than the first. Family. The word felt heavy. Complicated. She dropped the phone on the table and stood up, pacing slowly across the room. Her bare feet made soft sounds against the tiled floor. Family, she repeated under her breath. Family that laughed. Family that judged. Family that only respected results they could see. Her lips curved into a faint, almost ironic smile. If only they knew, she murmured. Her eyes drifted back to her laptop. On the screen were figures, large figures. Transactions. Growth charts. Confirmations from accounts that had been built quietly, patiently, strategically. No noise. No announcements. No validation. Just results. She walked back to the stool and closed the laptop gently. Let them laugh, she said softly. By 6:15 p.m., Chiamaka stood in front of her mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, simple, composed, unbothered. She wore a clean, well-fitted black dress. No flashy accessories. No designer label screaming for attention. Just quiet elegance. She adjusted her hair, smoothing it back with deliberate calm. Anyone who saw her would think the same thing they always did. Ordinary. She picked up her small handbag and glanced around the room one last time before heading out. The journey to Lekki was long enough for her thoughts to settle into silence. Traffic crawled. Horns blared. Vendors weaved between cars, shouting offers of snacks and cold drinks. But inside the ride, Chiamaka was still. No music. No distractions. Just her thoughts, and a quiet confidence that didn't need to prove itself. By the time she arrived at Uncle Ifini's gate, the sky had deepened into a rich evening blue. The mansion stood tall and proud, its bright lights cutting through the darkness like a declaration. Wealth lived here. And it wanted to be seen. The gate swung open after a brief exchange with security, and the car rolled into the compound. Luxury cars lined the driveway, gleaming, polished, expensive. Chiamaka stepped out, thanking the driver softly before walking toward the entrance. Even before she entered, she could hear the laughter. Loud. Carefree. Careless. She paused for just a second at the door. Then she stepped in. The room was alive. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, casting warm light over a table filled with food that looked too perfect to eat. Gold jewelry flashed. Perfume lingered in the air. Voices overlapped in conversations about contracts, business deals, international trips, and investments. No one noticed her at first. And honestly, she preferred it that way. She slipped into an empty seat quietly, folding her hands neatly on her lap. For a few minutes, she was invisible. And then... Ah! Look who finally decided to show up. The voice cut through the noise like a blade. Obinna. Of course. Chiamaka turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze. He was leaning back in his chair, glass in hand, a smirk already forming on his lips. Well, well. Chiamaka, he continued, his voice loud enough to draw attention. Still managing life. A few people chuckled. Heads turned. Eyes landed on her. There it was. The moment. She offered a small, polite smile. I'm doing fine, Obinna. Fine, he repeated, raising an eyebrow. Define fine. More laughter. Chiamaka didn't respond. She didn't need to. But Obinna wasn't done. He leaned forward slightly, his smile widening. Or should we contribute money for you tonight, he added casually. The table erupted. Laughter echoed. Some people shook their heads. Others covered their mouths, but their eyes gave them away. They were enjoying it. Every second of it. Chiamaka's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. Just slightly. Her face, however, remained calm. Composed. Untouched. Inside, something shifted, but not in the way they expected. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Something else. Something quieter. Auntie Ngozi clicked her tongue dramatically. Obinna, don't be wicked, she said, but her tone carried amusement. But truly, Chiamaka, at your age, you should be doing more. Chiamaka turned to her slowly. I am doing more, Auntie, she replied gently. A pause. Then Obinna laughed again. Doing more of what? Breathing? The laughter returned, louder this time. Chiamaka exhaled softly through her nose. Still calm. Still steady. You know, Obinna continued, swirling his drink, if things are really hard, I can connect you to something small. Even my driver is earning well these days. A ripple of amusement spread again. Chiamaka looked at him for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough to see everything she needed to see. Then she smiled. Not forced. Not defensive. Just calm. Thank you, she said. That response caught him off guard. Just slightly. But he recovered quickly, waving his hand dismissively. Anytime, he said. Dinner continued. Food was served. Conversations shifted. But the energy around her had changed. Now she was seen. Watched. Measured. Every movement, every word, quietly judged. And still, she remained exactly the same. Calm. Quiet. Certain. Because while they laughed, while they spoke, while they measured her worth based on what they could see, they had no idea what she carried. And she wasn't going to tell them. Not tonight. Not with words. The laughter didn't fade, it grew teeth. By the time the main course was served, the attention on Chiamaka had settled into something sharper, something more deliberate. It was no longer casual teasing, it was entertainment. And she was the center of it. Plates clinked softly against the polished table. The rich aroma of jollof rice, grilled chicken, and peppered goat meat filled the air, but Chiamaka barely noticed. Her appetite had nothing to do with food. Across the table, Obinna leaned back comfortably, like a man who had found his favorite show and intended to enjoy every second of it. "So tell us," he said, cutting into his chicken with slow precision, "what exactly do you do these days, Chiamaka?" The question sounded simple. But everyone at the table knew it wasn't. It was bait. Chiamaka dabbed her lips gently with a napkin before responding. "I work," she said calmly. A brief pause. Then, laughter again. Obinna shook his head, smiling like he'd expected nothing less. "We know you work," he said. "Even my gate man works. The question is, what kind of work?" A few people chuckled, exchanging glances. Auntie Ngozi leaned forward slightly, her jewelry catching the light. "You can tell us, my dear," she added, her voice dripping with false concern. "We're family. Maybe someone here can even help you improve your situation." Chiamaka looked around the table. Faces watching. Waiting. Judging. She could feel the weight of their expectations pressing in, but it didn't move her. "I handle business," she said simply. That answer landed even worse. Obinna burst out laughing. "Business," he repeated, almost choking on the word. "What business? Selling airtime?" The table shook with amusement. Someone at the far end added, "Or Instagram wigs." More laughter. Chiamaka picked up her glass and took a slow sip of water. Still calm. Still steady. Inside, memories flickered. Late nights. Endless calculations. Risks that made her heart pound in silence. Decisions that could have broken her, but didn't. She had built something real. Something powerful. And none of them had been there to see it. Auntie Ngozi sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "You see, this is the problem," she said, addressing no one in particular. "Young people these days don't want to be clear. Everything is business, business. Meanwhile, nothing is working." A few nods followed. Agreement. Validation. Obinna leaned forward again, resting his elbows on the table. "Let me be honest with you, Chiamaka," he said, his tone shifting slightly, less playful, more cutting. "Life is not this hard. If you're struggling, just say it. Pride won't help you." Chiamaka met his eyes. For a brief moment, the room seemed quieter. "I'm not struggling," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. But it carried. Obinna held her gaze for a second, then smirked. "Of course," he said lightly. "You're thriving." The sarcasm dripped. The laughter followed. But something about her response had unsettled the rhythm, just slightly. Uncle Ifini, who had been mostly quiet, cleared his throat. "So, Chiamaka," he said, his tone more measured, "where are you staying now?" "Yaba, sir." He nodded slowly. Still there." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A conclusion. A label. Chiamaka didn't react. Didn't explain. Didn't defend. Because she understood something they didn't. Not everything needed to be announced to be real. A younger cousin, Adiz, leaned toward her curiously. "But Auntie Kai," she said innocently, "don't you want to travel? Or buy a big house like Daddy's?" The table quieted slightly. Children always asked the questions adults dressed up. Chiamaka smiled softly at her. "Everything has its time," she replied. Adiz nodded, satisfied. But the adults exchanged looks again. To them, that answer meant one thing. She didn't have it. Obinna seized the moment. "You see," he said, gesturing lightly. "That's exactly what I'm saying. You need exposure. You need to think bigger. He pointed his fork slightly in her direction. Look at me, I just closed a deal last month. 7 figures. A murmur of approval spread. Oil and gas, he added proudly. Real money. He leaned back, crossing his legs. That's the level you should be aiming for. Not all these mysterious businesses. Chiamaka nodded once. Noted, she said. The simplicity of her response confused him again. He frowned slightly. You don't sound convinced. I heard you, she replied. A beat. Then he laughed it off. All right, he said. We'll talk later. I'll connect you. Auntie Ngozi clapped her hands lightly. Yes. That's good. She needs guidance. Guidance. Chiamaka almost smiled. If only they knew. The conversation shifted again, drifting into discussions about properties, international schools, and currency rates. The table became louder, more animated, more self-congratulatory. But every now and then, a glance, a whisper, a subtle comment, always circling back to her. And she came with ride-hailing, ABI. I didn't even see what she wore, very simple. Some people just don't like progress. Chiamaka heard it all. Every word. But she didn't react. Because reacting would give them what they wanted. And she had something far more valuable. Control. As dessert was served, Obinna wasn't done. He tapped his glass lightly with his fork, drawing attention again. Okay, he said, grinning. Let's play a small game. A few people leaned in, curious. Let everyone at this table say what they achieved this year, he continued. Just to inspire ourselves. Excited murmurs followed. Of course they liked that idea. It gave them another stage. One by one, they began. New houses. International contracts. Luxury cars. School admissions abroad. Each story louder than the last. Each achievement carefully presented. Pride filled the room. Then, it reached her. Obinna turned to her with a satisfied smile. Your turn, Chiamaka. All eyes returned. Again. Waiting. Expecting. She placed her spoon down gently. No rush. No pressure. I'm grateful for growth, she said. Silence. Then, confused laughter. That's all, someone asked. She nodded. That's all. Obinna shook his head, chuckling. You're a funny person, he said. Very funny. But beneath his laughter there was something else now. A hint of irritation. Because no matter how much they pushed, she wasn't breaking. Auntie Ngozi sighed again. Anyway, she said, waving her hand dismissively, everyone has their journey. The tone said everything. Some journeys mattered. Others didn't. Chiamaka sat back slightly. Quiet. Composed. Untouched. Because deep down, she already knew something they didn't. This wasn't her stage. And their validation meant nothing. Time passed. The dinner began to wind down. Chairs shifted. Phones came out. Conversation softened into smaller groups. But the energy lingered. That same subtle superiority. That same quiet dismissal. And through it all, Chiamaka remained exactly who she had been when she walked in. Calm. Certain. Unmoved. Because while they believed they had seen her, they had only seen what she allowed. And nothing more. By the time the last plates were cleared, the atmosphere had shifted into that relaxed, satisfied mood that followed a heavy meal and louder conversations. Laughter still floated around the room, but it had softened, less sharp, less targeted. For everyone else, the night was winding down. For Chiamaka, it was just reaching its quiet turning point. She reached for her handbag slowly, her movements unhurried, almost effortless. No one paid attention at first. Why would they? To them, she was already finished. Already categorized. Already understood. She stood up gently from her seat. The chair made a soft scraping sound against the polished floor, just enough to draw a few glances. "Ah, you're leaving already?" Auntie Ngozi asked, raising an eyebrow as she adjusted her wrapper. Her tone carried mild surprise, but not enough to suggest she wanted her to stay. Chiamaka offered a small, polite smile. "Yes, Auntie. I have an early start tomorrow." Obinna let out a short laugh from where he sat, swirling the last bit of his drink in his glass. "Early start to what?" he asked casually. "Another business meeting?" A few people nearby chuckled. Not as loud as before, but still enough. Chiamaka turned her head slightly toward him. "Something like that," she replied. Her voice remained calm. Too calm. It unsettled him again, but only for a second. He waved it off with a smirk. "All right, safe journey," he said. Then, with a playful edge, he added, "Hope transport fare no-go finish for road." A small ripple of laughter followed. Someone at the far end muttered, "Make she manage 'em well." More quiet amusement. Chiamaka nodded once. "Thank you," she said. No irritation. No sarcasm. Just acknowledgement. That response lingered in the air longer than any comeback would have. Because it gave them nothing. No reaction. No satisfaction. Just silence. She turned away from the table without another word. No long goodbyes. No forced hugs. No extra politeness. Just a simple exit. And yet, there was something about the way she walked. Steady. Unhurried. Certain. It didn't match the version of her they had created in their minds. Auntie Ngozi noticed it first. She frowned slightly, watching her niece move toward the door. "There's something about that girl," she murmured under her breath. Obinna shrugged. "Pride," he said dismissively. "Empty pride." Uncle Ifini didn't say anything. But his eyes followed her too. Quietly observant. Chiamaka stepped out of the house and into the cool night air. The shift was immediate. The noise behind her faded. The tension lifted. Silence wrapped around her like something familiar. She paused just outside the entrance, inhaling deeply. For the first time that night. She smiled fully. Not the polite smile she wore inside. Not the controlled expression she maintained under pressure. This one was real. Soft. Certain. Free. She adjusted her handbag on her shoulder and began walking toward the gate. Each step measured. Each movement intentional. Behind her, the house still buzzed with life. Voices. Laughter. The clinking of glasses. They had already moved on. Already returned to their world. Because to them, nothing significant had happened. Just another dinner. Just another round of jokes. Just another reminder of who was up and who was not. But outside, a different story was unfolding. The compound lights stretched long shadows across the driveway. Luxury cars gleamed under the soft glow, Range Rovers, Lexus SUVs, sleek sedans that spoke loudly without needing introductions. Chiamaka walked past them without a second glance. Not impressed. Not intimidated. Just passing through. The gate came into view. And just beyond it, parked slightly away from the main entrance, almost hidden in the shadows, was the answer she had carried all along. A sleek black Mercedes-Benz. Quiet. Powerful. Unmistakable. It didn't shout. It didn't need to. It simply existed, with authority. Chiamaka slowed her steps as she approached it. Her eyes softened slightly. Not with pride. Not with arrogance. But with recognition. This wasn't just a car. It was proof. Of nights no one saw. Of risks no one understood. Of discipline no one applauded. She reached into her handbag and pulled out the key. For a brief second, she stood there as still, composed, grounded. Then she pressed the button. The car responded instantly. A soft flash of lights. A quiet unlock. No drama. No noise. Just presence. Back inside the house, the laughter had started to rise again. Obinna was mid-story, animated as ever. So I told them, if the contract is not at my level, I don't even bother. Suddenly, headlights cut through the compound. Bright. Unexpected. The light spilled through the windows, interrupting the rhythm of the room. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. "What's that?" someone asked. The gatekeeper's voice could be heard faintly outside, sounding slightly confused. A car engine hummed smoothly. Not loud, but commanding enough to demand attention. Obinna paused mid-sentence, his brow furrowing. "Who just came in?" he muttered. Uncle Ifini stood up slightly, peering toward the entrance. "That's not one of ours," he said. Curiosity spread quickly. One by one, people began to shift, trying to get a better view. Auntie Ngozi adjusted her glasses. "Maybe a guest," she suggested. But there was uncertainty in her voice. Because whoever it was, they hadn't been announced. Outside, the car rolled forward slowly. Controlled. Deliberate. Until it came to a smooth, effortless stop right in the center of the compound. The engine went quiet. Complete silence followed. Inside the house, no one spoke. Not anymore. Because something about that moment felt different. The door of the car opened. Slowly. Deliberately. And then a figure stepped out. Calm. Composed. Familiar. Chiamaka. For a second, no one reacted. Because their minds hadn't caught up with what their eyes were seeing. Obinna blinked. Once. Then again. His expression shifted. Confusion. Disbelief. Something close to shock. "That's," he started, but the words didn't finish. Auntie Ngozi's hand froze mid-air, her glass suspended just inches from her lips. Uncle Ifini stepped forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. Chiamaka closed the car door gently. No rush. No performance. She adjusted her dress with a small, effortless movement. Then she turned toward the house. Toward them. The same people who had laughed. The same people who had measured her. The same people who thought they understood her. And in that moment, without saying a single word, everything changed. Not because she had spoken, but because she hadn't needed to. Because the truth was now impossible to ignore. For a moment, the entire compound felt suspended in time. No laughter. No whispers. No movement. Just silence, thick, heavy, undeniable. Chiamaka stood beside the car, one hand resting lightly against the door as if she had done this 1,000 times before. There was no rush in her posture, no urgency to explain anything. She didn't look around immediately. She didn't need to. She already knew they were watching. Inside the house, the first reaction came in fragments. "That's not her car," someone said, almost instinctively. "It can't be," another voice followed. Obina stepped closer to the doorway, his steps slower now, less confident than before. His eyes were fixed on the car, scanning it like he was searching for a mistake. The sleek black body reflected the compound lights perfectly. Clean. Untouched. Expensive. There was no mistake. Uncle Ifini walked forward, his brows drawn together, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Who owns that car?" he asked quietly. But no one answered. Because the answer was already standing there. Chiamaka finally lifted her gaze. Calm. Direct. Unshaken. Her eyes met theirs, not with pride, not with defiance, but with a quiet clarity that said more than any words could. Then she moved. She stepped away from the car and walked toward the house. Each step measured. Each movement controlled. The sound of her heels against the tiled ground echoed softly, filling the silence that no one else seemed able to break. By the time she reached the entrance, everyone had gathered. Drawn in by curiosity. Held in place by disbelief. Obina stood at the front, his earlier confidence nowhere to be found. His smile had disappeared completely, replaced by something unfamiliar, uncertainty. Chiamaka, he said, her name coming out slower than usual. She stopped just a few steps away from them. Yes? That single word landed heavier than expected. Obina glanced back at the car, then at her again. Is that your car? He asked. The question sounded strange. Almost unnecessary. Chiamaka followed his gaze briefly, as if she hadn't noticed the car until now. Then she nodded once. Yes. Silence again. Deeper this time. Because confirmation changed everything. Auntie Ngozi lowered her glass slowly, her eyes widening just slightly. But how? She asked before she could stop herself. It wasn't a polished question. It wasn't carefully framed. It was raw. Honest. Confused. Chiamaka looked at her gently. I told you, she said. I work. No one laughed. Not this time. Uncle Ifini stepped forward, his expression shifting rapidly, from confusion to calculation to something that looked almost like admiration. This is impressive, he said, clearing his throat slightly. Very impressive. Chiamaka inclined her head politely. Thank you, sir. Obina let out a short breath, running a hand through his hair. Wait, he said, forcing a small laugh that didn't quite land. You mean all this time? He gestured vaguely, unable to finish his sentence. Chiamaka didn't help him. She simply watched him. Calm. Patient. Letting him sit in the weight of his own realization. A cousin at the back whispered, "This car is not cheapo." Another replied quietly, "Not at all." The whispers spread, but they were different now. No longer mocking. No longer dismissive. Now, they were cautious. Respectful. Even a little unsure. Auntie Ngozi stepped closer, her earlier confidence replaced by something softer. Chiamaka, she said, her voice gentler now, you didn't tell us you were doing so well. Chiamaka's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile. I wasn't asked, she replied. That answer settled heavily. Because it was true. They hadn't asked to understand. They had only spoken to judge. Obina tried again, his tone shifting into something more familiar, something that sounded like recovery. Ah, come on now, he said, chuckling lightly. We were just joking earlier. You know how family is. A few people nodded quickly, eager to align with the new direction. Yes, just jokes. Nothing serious. Chiamaka looked around at them. One by one. Taking in their faces. Their expressions. Their sudden warmth. Then she spoke. I know. 2 simple words. But they didn't carry agreement. they carried understanding. The kind that sees through everything. A brief silence followed. Not awkward. Not tense. Just revealing. Uncle Ifini clapped his hands once, breaking the moment. "This is good," he said, forcing a smile. "Very good. We should celebrate this kind of success." A few people laughed lightly. But it didn't have the same energy as before. Because something had shifted. Irreversibly. The balance of the room had changed. Chiamaka adjusted her handbag slightly. "I should be going," she said. Obina blinked. "Going? But you just..." "I came for dinner," she said calmly. "I've had dinner." No one stopped her. No one knew how to. Because whatever authority they thought they had over her was gone. She turned slightly, then paused. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out the car key and extended it toward the gatekeeper, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the scene, still trying to process everything. "I'll be back tomorrow to pick it up," she said. The man hesitated for a second before taking it carefully. "Yes, Ma," he replied. Ma. The word didn't go unnoticed. Chiamaka gave a small nod. Then she turned back toward the gate. No rush. No hesitation. Behind her, no one spoke. Because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound hollow. No joke that would land. No comment that would feel right. They could only watch. And in that silence, the truth settled fully. It wasn't just about the car. It wasn't just about money. It was about everything they had assumed. Everything they had believed. Everything they had said. And how easily it had all fallen apart. Chiamaka reached the gate and stepped out into the night once again. The air felt different now. Lighter. Clearer. Not because anything around her had changed, but because something had been revealed. Behind her, the mansion still stood tall. Still bright. Still full. But inside, something was missing. The certainty they once had. And standing outside it all, Chiamaka walked away quietly. Exactly the same as she had arrived. But seen differently. Finally. Clearly. The silence she left behind didn't disappear when she stepped out of the gate. It followed them. Lingering in the air like something unresolved. Inside the mansion, no one returned to their seats immediately. The energy that once filled the room, loud, proud, effortless, had drained into something quieter, something uncertain. Obina was the first to move. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding and turned back into the living room, forcing a small laugh that sounded unfamiliar, even to himself. "Well, that was unexpected," he said. No one responded. Auntie Ngozi slowly placed her glass on the table, her fingers lingering on it as if grounding herself. "She has grown," she murmured. It wasn't admiration. Not fully. It was something closer to realization. Uncle Ifini walked back to his seat, but he didn't sit immediately. His eyes were distant, thoughtful. "How long?" he asked quietly. Again, no one answered. Because none of them knew. And that was the problem. All this time, Chiamaka had been present. Visible. Around them. Yet completely unknown. A younger cousin broke the silence. "I thought she said she was in Yaba," she said. "She is," someone replied. The confusion deepened. Obina shook his head, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Please," he said, waving his hand. "Let's not exaggerate things. It's just a car." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. Because he knew what that car represented. He knew the level it belonged to. And he knew it didn't match the version of Chiamaka he had created. Auntie Ngozi turned to him slowly. Obina, she said, her voice measured, do you know what kind of car that is? He hesitated. Of course I do. And you think it is just a car? He didn't respond. Because there was no answer that would protect his pride. Uncle Ifini finally sat down, exhaling deeply. We misjudged her, he said. The statement landed firmly. No decoration. No excuse. Just truth. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided eye contact. Because acknowledging that meant acknowledging everything that came before it. The jokes. The laughter. The assumptions. Obina scoffed lightly, but it lacked strength. Nobody misjudged anybody, he said. She didn't present herself properly. Auntie Ngozi frowned. So it is her fault, she asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Because for the first time that night, the room wasn't on his side. The same people who laughed with him earlier were now quiet. Observing. Reconsidering. The balance had shifted. And he felt it. Outside the compound, Chiamaka walked down the quiet street, her step steady, her expression unchanged. The night wrapped around her in a calm that felt familiar. No noise. No pressure. No expectations. Just peace. A car approached slowly from the distance, her ride. It pulled up beside her, and the driver stepped out quickly. Good evening, Ma, he said respectfully. Good evening, she replied, opening the door. As she settled into the back seat, she glanced once toward the mansion behind her. The light still shone brightly. But from where she sat, it looked smaller. Quieter. Less important. Where to, Ma? The driver asked. Home, she said softly. The car pulled away smoothly. Inside, she leaned back slightly, her gaze drifting to the window as the city lights passed by in soft streaks. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up. A message from her mother. How was dinner? Chiamaka looked at the screen for a moment. Then she typed. It was revealing. She sent it and placed the phone beside her. Her reflection stared back faintly from the window. Calm. Grounded. Unchanged. Because the truth was, nothing about her had shifted. Not her work. Not her journey. Not her identity. The only thing that had changed was what they now knew. Back at the mansion, the night struggled to return to normal. Attempts at conversation fell flat. Laughter came in short, uncertain bursts. The ease was gone. Replaced by something heavier. Auntie Ngozi stood up slowly. I'm tired, she said. I'll be going. Others began to follow. One by one. Not because the night had ended, but because the moment had. And it couldn't be recreated. Obina remained where he was, staring at the empty space where she had stood earlier. His jaw tightened slightly. Not in anger, but in something more complicated. Something closer to realization. Uncle Ifini approached him. You spoke too much, he said quietly. Obina didn't look at him. She allowed it, he replied. Uncle Ifini shook his head. No, he said. She observed it. That difference settled heavily. Because it meant she had seen everything. And chosen silence. Not out of weakness, but out of certainty. Obina exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. For the first time that night, he had nothing to say. The house gradually emptied. Cars drove out. Lights dimmed. Voices faded. Until only silence remained. A different kind of silence. The kind that forces reflection. The kind that doesn't let you hide from what you've seen. The next morning came quietly. as if the night before had been nothing more than a passing moment. But for those who were there, it stayed. In small ways. In subtle thoughts. In quiet realizations. Chiamaka returned later that day, just as she said she would. No announcement. No audience. Just presence. The gatekeeper hurried forward the moment he saw her. "Good afternoon, Ma," he said, handing her the keys carefully. "Good afternoon," she replied with a small nod. She walked to the car, her movements just as calm as before. No extra attention. No need for it. Because this was her normal. She opened the door and got in. The engine started smoothly. Effortlessly. As she drove out of the compound, she didn't look back. There was nothing behind her that needed revisiting. No validation to collect. No approval to seek. Because everything she needed, she had already built. Quietly. Patiently. Completely. And as the car merged into the Lagos road, moving with steady confidence, one thing remained certain. Wealth had not changed her. It had only revealed the truth. About everyone else.